Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
while we can see light at the end of the tunnel, we are still in the tunnel.
Healthcare workers received Chicago's first doses of the COVID vaccine at Loretto Hospital on the west side.
We are at the beginning of the end.
Plus, we talk with the head of Illinois' public health department about this historic moment of the first vaccinations in Illinois.
As the COVID vaccine makes its way across the country, officials say to be on the lookout for scams. We have a rundown of what exactly to watch for.
How food pantries are grappling with COVID-19 safety as they try to meet the holiday season demand.
A massive cybersecurity breach by the Russians has hit 5 agencies, including Homeland Security and the State Department.
A ProPublica report finds immigrant teenagers are illegally employed, working night shifts in suburban factories.
I'm Ugabalta in Pilsen's iconic 18th Street, where small businesses and artists are getting creative this holiday season.
And a chainsaw artist from Chicago carves tree trunks into wildlife. But first, some of today's top stories. A state panel says an endangered Southside Chicago hospital must stay open. The Illinois Health Facilities Board voted unanimously to reject a plan to allow the financially troubled Bronzeville Hospital to close, at least for now. The hospital could choose to go before the board again for another hearing on this. Mercy serves a predominantly low-income Black and Hispanic Latino community on the near South Side and was slated to close early next year due to lack of funding and lack of success merging with other hospitals. We'll have more on this story on tomorrow's program. And state public health officials report more than 7,300 new cases of coronavirus in the last 24 hours, with 117 additional deaths. That makes for a total caseload surpassing 863,000, with 14,509 total deaths. The 7-day test positivity rate is 10.3%. New details emerging today about a federal COVID relief compromise package. $748 billion bill would include $300 billion for another round of forgivable small business paycheck protection loans. It also includes a $300 unemployment supplement through April. For Chicago, it has transit dollars for both airports and to keep public transit system running without layoffs through at least the end of the first quarter next year. And it proposes $82 billion for education systems like CPS. But Mayor Lightfoot slammed the proposal today, calling it unacceptable that the bill didn't include direct relief to state and local governments.
I have made it very clear to our senators, this is fundamentally unfair, unacceptable, and I expect our federal leadership to stand up and argue why federal, state, and local funding absolutely must be part of the stimulus.
A separate bill proposes $160 billion in state and local aid, that is, but could prove more difficult to pass in the Republican-controlled U.S. Senate. The coronavirus vaccine is in Chicago. Healthcare workers in the city, Cook and Lake counties, and Peoria are among the first in the state who this morning got the vaccine. Amanda Vinicky joins us now from Loretto Hospital on the city's west side. Amanda.
Paris, this is the moment that we have been waiting for so long, the beginning, at least, to the end of the coronavirus pandemic, and we are on the path to that thanks to vaccines like the one that University of Illinois Health Dr. Marina Del Rios received this morning to literal applause. Now, she is one of the 5 healthcare workers to get the first dose of the COVID vaccine while cameras were rolling during a made-for-TV event at the Loretto Hospital. And there is a reason that 5 people got it at once, and that is because the vaccine is distributed in a vial with 5 doses. That is one of the many logistical issues that has to be worked out. This is the Pfizer vaccine, so it has to be transported and stored in ultra-cool temperatures. It is, by the way, warmed up to room temperature before it goes into a syringe. Now, Del Rios was tough when that needle pierced her arm, but she got emotional, saying she was holding back tears when she talked about what it meant.
Many of us, especially those of us that identify with and serve Black and Latino communities, have lost co-workers, friends, and family members. We worry about our capacity to keep our patients safe in the setting of overcrowded hospitals. We worry about bringing COVID home to our families.
Now, others there sounded downright joyful. They were all smiles when talking about this, like Chicago's Public Health Commissioner, Dr. Allison Arwady. She said there is nothing more that she wanted for Christmas than for a vaccine to be as effective as studies have shown this one to be. Now, city officials purposefully made a big show of this, in part because even though it is going to be quite some time before anyone besides those who work in hospitals, long-term care facilities, or other emergency response services will actually be in line to get the vaccine. They are actively promoting this as something that is safe.
And that's someone that's a believer. I'm a faith believer. I believe in God, and I believe that God sent the scientists and doctors to us to provide this vaccine for us.
The Lightfoot administration also purposely held this made-for-TV event at the Loretto Hospital. It's in Austin, a primarily black neighborhood that has been particularly ravaged by the coronavirus.
Unfortunately, too long, African Americans and Latino Americans have suffered the brunt of inequity and disparities in health care. As an example, prior to COVID, if you lived in downtown Chicago, life expectancy there was 88.2 years of life. And we couldn't open these curtains because of the cameras, but you can see downtown Chicago over my shoulder out the window. But if you come just 20-minute drive on the Eisenhower to exit 23B, that number drops down to 68.2 years of life. You lose 20 years of life in a 20-minute drive, and I think that's wrong.
Still, other hospitals across the city will soon be inoculating their own employees. Hospitals like Rush University Medical Center expect to receive their own allotments of the Pfizer vaccine any day now. Rush converted a hallway that typically would lead to either bathrooms, elevators, or actually the flower shop into instead an employee vaccination clinic. Rush's director of inpatient pharmacy says that they are set up to give up to 1,000 shots a day, one every 7 minutes in each of the 10 vaccination bays. Now, there are a couple of reasons behind this desire for a quick turn. For one, they want to get doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists that vaccine as soon as possible in order to keep those employees safe, but also so that none of the precious elixir is wasted.
We're going to be getting it at the ultra-low storage temperature of -80. We do have ultra-low storage freezers here at Rush, but not every place has that. Some sites are going to be getting it at the refrigerated temperatures, and there is a timeline associated with that. So if you get it at the ultra-low temperature like we're getting, it's going to be stable for 6 months at that temperature. But once you either take it out to thaw, or if you receive it on site at the regular refrigerated temperature, then you only have 5 days before the drug is going to go bad.
Shaughnessy says all of this is exciting, and she says she absolutely will get the vaccine when it's her turn. She doesn't know when that is going to be because she works mostly in an office setting. It is the frontline workers, those who interact daily with coronavirus patients, who are in line to get it first. Now, Chicago's Dr. Arwady said that the 5 frontline workers who right here got the vaccine this morning, they were, by the way, from Loretto as well as UI Health, Norwegian American Hospitals, they each signed up for what's really a voluntary app. It's called V6, and through it they are going to get intermittent tests every couple of days or months asking about potential immune responses, in other words, side effects. The city is also making a point to track racial and demographic data for anyone who gets the vaccine. This is part of an effort to make sure that it is equitably distributed. Anyone who got a shot in their arm today, anyone going forward, is going to need a second and final dose 21 days from now. And so that is to say they are not yet immune, and therefore widespread immunity is still a ways off. As you heard Mayor Lightfoot put it, we see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we are still in that tunnel, which means we need to remain vigilant, she said. We do still have months ahead of mask wearing, social distancing, and taking other efforts to curb spread of a virus that right now is killing an average of 22 Chicagoans a day. Paris, back to you.
All right, Amanda, thank you very much. And later in the program, government officials are warning residents of coronavirus-related scams. We have a rundown of what to watch out for. But first now to Brandis Friedman and the head of the Illinois Public Health Department. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. While Illinoisans may have felt some wave of relief today from those first vaccinations, much is still in question. For example, how can the city and state ensure residents get equal access to the vaccine? And on top of that, how can officials ensure the public trusts it? Joining us to answer those questions and more is Dr. Ngozi Ezike, the director of the Illinois Department of Public Health. Dr. Ezike, you've been working on this, I'm sure, some very long days for months now. First vaccines were given out today. How does this feel for you?
Thank you, Brandis, for having me. It's a great day. It's a great day. This is the day that we've been praying for, that we've been planning for, hoping for, and now we have people in the state of Illinois who have gotten the first dose of the 2-dose series. It's the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of the end of this pandemic, and we have something to be excited about. It's still a long road. This last mile still has a bunch of hurdles and obstacles, but we're at that last mile.
And this mile might feel like the longest, you know, once you get closer to something. It seems like it takes forever to get there. What can we expect going forward, though, as far as what's next in this process with regard to vaccinations?
I think at the top of the needs is patience. Patience by the people of Illinois, because the idea that you're seeing people get vaccinated and you're saying, I'm a worker in a healthcare setting, so I should be getting it in the next hour or two. But the truth is that the amount of vaccine is lower than the demand at this point. And so we will be giving out all the doses as quickly as we get it, and then we'll be expecting weekly shipments of additional vaccine. We're also anticipating additional manufacturers' vaccines to also get that emergency use authorization, which will increase the supply of vaccines and help us get more of those individuals vaccinated in a shorter amount of time.
Now, over the last few weeks, of course, there's been some misconceptions about herd immunity. Tell us a little bit about how vaccination actually gets us there.
Right. So vaccination is really what we're thinking about when we think of herd immunity. We want to have so many people vaccinated such that if there is a case of this disease, the disease can't find susceptible individuals to infect. So if there's one case and they're in a group of 10 and 9 of those people have been vaccinated and there's only one sole individual who hasn't been vaccinated, that case has to directly infect that person. And so that's harder than if there were 10 susceptible people. The likelihood of being able to infect several of those people and promote the continued transmission of this virus is much more likely. So we want so many people vaccinated that when there is a case and when there's diminishing cases, it's hard to find a susceptible individual to further infect.
So at a press conference this morning, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, she spoke about vaccine equity. Here's what she said.
It is mandatory, not optional, mandatory that you collect the demographic information of the people that are getting vaccinated so we understand how we are rolling out this vaccine and making sure that we are doing it in an equitable fashion. It is absolutely essential. We will be enforcing that mandate. We've talked to the governor about it. We want this to be a statewide effort.
So, Dr. Ezike, does the state plan on mandating the collection of demographic information of the people getting vaccinated?
That information is a required field when you put the information into our state immunization registry system. Mayor Lightfoot, just like Governor J.B. Pritzker, are equity champions, and this is one of the foremost issues for both of them. And so collecting that information is essential for us to be able to have full eyes on in terms of where is this vaccine getting its uptake and where do we need to allocate subsequent weeks doses based on the numbers that we're seeing in certain counties, in certain zip codes. Very important information to really get at this equity issue.
And beyond collecting that demographic information, how is the state ensuring that the vaccine is distributed to the communities that need it once their time has come? Right.
So that's a multi-pronged approach there. We have to obviously know where the previous doses have gone. And then we also have to make sure that we have individuals in those communities that want to get the vaccine. And so it's not a matter of coercion, but communication to make sure that we understand what any reservation is, what the vaccine hesitancy is, what information gaps may be there that we can fill, what are the concerns. All of those issues are priority as well, because we can't coerce anyone. We just want to make everyone make the decision that they're most comfortable with. We also understand that this might be a process or a journey where people may be willing to hear more. They may want to wait some. They might want to have other people go first, if you will. So there are people who are going to be in different stages. There'll be early adopters, give it to me now. There may be people who say, I'm never getting it. But there are people who are in the middle of that. And so with education, with time, with facts, I think we can get many of the people to see that this is the right way, another important layer to get us past this pandemic.
And Dr. Ezike, I know in this process you're dispelling a lot of myths as well. It does not cause infertility. There's no tracking chip. You cannot get COVID vaccine from it. We're actually out of time, but I just wanted to be sure that we mentioned that that you are dispelling those myths. Our thanks to Dr. Ngozi Ezike. Best of luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Happy holidays.
Same to you. And now to Phil Ponce and the story of some immigrant young people potentially being put in harm's way. Phil.
Brandis, it's common knowledge that many factories in the area employ immigrants to do all sorts of work, from baking pastries to cleaning bolts. But a November report by the nonprofit publication ProPublica found that some of these immigrant workers are only 13, 14, and 15 years old. These children sometimes perform hard and dangerous jobs against the law and often work overnight shifts and go to school during the day. Joining us to talk about her report is ProPublica reporter Melissa Sanchez. Melissa, thank you for joining us. And first of all, give us some background on who these young people are.
Sure. So I wrote about a group of young people who live in Bensonville, so a suburb just near the airport, near O'Hare, who came in recent years from Guatemala. So they've come as part of the wave of hundreds of thousands of Central Americans who've crossed the border in recent years. And these are kids who came, a lot of them as unaccompanied minors. Some of them came with parents or other adult relatives, and they wound up settling in Bensonville. They attend high school in nearby Elmhurst at York Community High School, and attend school during the day, and then at night work in factories to pay off debts and to send money home to family.
And a little bit more on why they work. You mentioned pay off debts, but these young people you talk to about 15 of them, are very motivated. Why are they so motivated?
Yeah, I mean, so they left Guatemala for a lot of reasons. I mean, some of it's economic, some of it is to escape gangs, etc. But what they have in common is that they all come from very poor families, and to come to this country isn't free. They all came seeking asylum, so they're here with some sort of status. But the trek from Guatemala to Mexico is very dangerous, and you have to pay a human smuggler, a coyote, to bring you here. And those fees can range from a few thousand to, I've heard, $10,000 per person. And so the kids, when they come, again, alone or with some relative, they know that they will be responsible for paying off that debt upon their arrival here. And they have to pay that debt because their families back home can't afford it. So that's the big debt that they have. But then depending on their circumstances here, they might owe money to a sponsor who took them out of the shelter where they might have stayed for a few weeks or months when they arrived. They have to pay their share of the rent. They have to pay for their clothing, their food. And then because they do have relatives back home who are in financial need, nearly all of them send money home to their families, to their parents or siblings that they left behind.
So these some of these young workers are as young as 13 years old, you pointed out. How are they able to get jobs? It's against the law to hire people for the kind of work that they do and for the hours they put in. How does that happen?
Yeah, it's really complicated, but I mean, like you said at the start, so a lot of the factory jobs are filled by immigrants. A lot of the immigrants are here without legal status, so they're undocumented. But it's pretty well established in Chicago that if you want work, there's temp agencies that are willing to hire you regardless of status. You might have fake papers. So the same applies to these kids. The youngest I spoke with started working at age 13 at an overnight shift at a factory. And he had, like all the rest of them, had a fake ID that said that he was over 20. And when you look at these kids, they look like they're 13 or 12. They look very young. They don't look 20 or 25 like their IDs say. But they take these IDs to temp agencies that accept them and then put them to work in different factories across the suburbs.
So it's the temp agencies that hire them, not the factories themselves. But you pointed out one case of a 15-year-old who was going to school and he was working 6 12-hour overnight shifts a week. How do they do that and go to school?
I don't know, and they don't do it very well. I mean, so that boy, like all of them, they show up to school very exhausted. The reason they're going to school is because they want to stay in this country. They have pending asylum cases, and immigration court judges want to hear that they're in school, not working. So they go to school, but they show up and they just pass out in class. They chug energy drinks and coffee like adults. And then when they go to work, they're still tired. I mean, they might sleep for a couple of hours in between work and school or in between school and work, but they're still exhausted when they show up at work, which might make it easier for them to get hurt, to slip up on the job and have an accident.
You mentioned, I mentioned that according to the article, you spoke to 15 young people. How widespread would you say this is?
I think it's really widespread. There's not going to be any numbers to show that, but we know that in the past 5 or 6 years, there have been hundreds of thousands of young people from Central America who come. And I've spoken to people all over the country, educators, labor advocates, others who know that in communities where there's large numbers of Guatemalans, Salvadorans, Hondurans, that there's a lot of young people who, like the kids in Bensonville, came here with debt and they ended up working. So I spoke with folks in Cincinnati, in in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and New Orleans, and Southern California, where there's large communities of these kids, and they're working. They're working either in fish packing and in roofing. Even in Urbana-Champaign, there's a large community of indigenous Guatemalans who work in roofing and in restaurants. So I wish I had a number to put it, but even after we published the story, I heard from educators all over the country that it's happening in their schools too.
Any prospect of a crackdown on the people who are facilitating what is illegal employment?
Not at the moment. So the State Department of Labor is very interested in knowing where these kids work and doing some sort of enforcement action. But it's complicated because, I mean, for these 15 kids, they work at least 25, 26 different facilities through at least 4 different temp agencies. It's not one bad actor that's doing it. It's very widespread. So at the moment, I haven't heard of any specific actions that the state is taking. At the same time, these kids don't want it to be known where they work because they want to continue working. So it makes it difficult for the enforcement agencies to do anything about it when nobody is telling them where these kids are working.
Melissa Sanchez, thank you so much. Very engaging piece. Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, the holiday window competition on Pilsen's iconic 18th Street. So please stay with us.
Can get past the idea of turning this into a political topic and really get to serving our communities. That's something I can get behind.
Maybe we can use this as a calling card to unite.
And there's much more news ahead, including a conversation with one of the 5 healthcare workers who were the first to receive the COVID vaccine in Chicago. But first, a nonprofit on Chicago's Lower West Side is getting creative this holiday season. The Pilsen initiative is designed to boost business and support local artists amid the coronavirus. WTDW News Director in Chicago Tonight Latino Voices host Hugo Balta has more.
Just to bring a little holiday cheer.
This winter, Pilsen's iconic 18th Street is finding new ways to get into the holiday spirit. Small businesses are partnering with local artists, bringing festive window displays to the neighborhood.
Necesitamos un poquito de entusiasmo navideño.
The initiative is also a healthy competition, says Alex Esparza, president of the Economic Strategies Development Corporation, a nonprofit in Pilsen. Residents can vote for their favorite displays online. The winning artist will receive $1,000.
It was the Macy's or the Marshall on State Street kind of idea of families coming out and visualizing this window displays.
The 2020 Christmas Window Walk is both an opportunity for local artists to showcase their work and to increase foot traffic on 18th Street, Pilsen's commercial corridor, which Esparza says has significantly seen a decrease throughout the pandemic. The initiative is welcome help during a challenging time, says Pilsen artist Leticia Rodarte.
It's been difficult. It's been very difficult because under normal circumstances, artists have a hard time selling their art. But now during the pandemic, it's even worse.
Rodarte created the window display at Cafe Jumping Bean. She used recycled items like corn leaves to recreate a Christmas moment from her childhood. She hopes it reminds residents passing by of their own families.
Especially the Latinos that are familiar with the scenario. They're like, oh, I remember when I was a child. Oh my God, my grandmother's tortillas and my grandmother's this. So it makes them happy. It's a moment that amongst all the chaos makes them happy.
Throughout the pandemic, some organizations have pivoted to drive-through events, but Pilsen's window displays are detailed, requiring them to be viewed up close.
It's really meant to be seen in person right outside the window. Can you tell us a little bit more about that specific strategy?
So, I mean, it's very easy to be able to drive through a neighborhood because you can go through a neighborhood in 5 minutes. But that doesn't really necessarily generate anything outside of just traffic.
Esparza hopes the intricate displays will bring more business to the community. That was Stephanie Seasonton's goal when she designed a storefront of Mexican gift shop Escaramuza.
It allowed me to not only continue to be creative, but also help the community. I'm hoping that this was able to help Julio bring in more business and visibility to his wonderful gift shop here.
Escaramuza owner Julio Velázquez says so far it has.
So, sí ha ayudado. La gente se para enfrente de la decoración, se toma fotografías. Durante el fin de semana hemos notado eso, que a la gente le atrae. O sea, sí ha tenido un impacto positivo para el negocio.
That's also true for Rodarte's display at Cafe Jumping Bean, says owner Eliezer Delgado. And he says the full Christmas walk has helped lift the spirits of residents passing by.
I see the people, stopping by, taking pictures of it and checking in on social media with it. So that's been nice. So, it's, and I see it up and down 18th Street. It's not just our location. I see it at the other spots that have it. The artwork and the windows have definitely done, a little bit to help, with the mood of people.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Hugo Balta.
Voting ends on Monday, December 21st, though you can catch the decorations through January 3rd on 18th and the surrounding streets there. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, hear from one of the 5 healthcare workers who were the first to receive the COVID vaccine in Chicago. Government officials say to be on the lookout for COVID-19 scams. We have a rundown of what to watch for and what's been found so far. Food pantries are facing unprecedented demand this year. They're meeting the needs of the hungry during COVID-19 restrictions. The federal government is scrambling after a huge cybersecurity breach against 5 agencies by Russian hackers. And meet a local man who for nearly 40 years has used chainsaws on dead trees to make impressive wooden sculptures. But first, some more of today's top stories. Governor J.B. Pritzker outlined $700 million in state budget cuts for the current fiscal year. The plan includes a hiring freeze, grant reduction, and negotiations with the state's top public employee union on $75 million worth of savings that could include worker furlough days. The governor says the total budget deficit this year is approaching $4 billion, $2 billion of that because of a revenue shortfall due to COVID. Pritzker today blasted Republicans for helping sink the graduated income tax amendment.
They worked and spent endlessly to defeat the best option Democrats put on the table. And after all their bluster, it turns out that Republicans have no plan at all to put the state on a firm fiscal foundation. In the wake of their deafening silence, our challenge remains.
Meanwhile, House Minority Leader Jim Durkin barked back at the governor, as well as the House Speaker and Senate Majority Leader, saying in a statement they were warned about the fiscal shortfall and passed a, quote, fantasy budget. Quote, instead of living within our means, Durkin's statement says, they attempted to trick the voters into raising taxes and were sorely rejected by Democrat, Republican, and independent voters across the state. President-elect Joe Biden's pick for Secretary of Transportation is reportedly in, and it will not be former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg will reportedly get the nod. Buttigieg was a top surrogate for Biden's campaign and would have to be confirmed by the Senate to oversee the massive agency that has big ramifications for Chicago's transit systems and airports. Buttigieg would also be the first openly gay cabinet member in U.S. history. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Now we check back in with Amanda Vinicky, who spent the day on Chicago's west side in Austin at Loretto Hospital. That's where the first COVID-19 vaccines were administered in the city earlier today. Amanda.
Yes, Brandis, a couple of hours ago, I spoke with Mark Hooks. He is a registered nurse here at the Loretto Hospital. He's worked here for about a year, and he is among the handful of those medical workers who today, right there in that building, got that first dose of the Pfizer vaccine here in Chicago. And I started out by asking Hooks, how is he feeling after that shot?
I feel amazing. I feel great. I feel excited. Physically, I don't have any symptoms. Some very slight soreness in my left arm around the injection site, but that's to be expected. But no, I feel
Similar
great.
to what you would get if you got, or when you get the flu shot, for example?
Yeah, a flu shot or any kind of medicine. We give, different kinds of medications into the muscle. So yeah, but yeah, very similar to the flu shot, for example, for sure.
Are you at all uneasy knowing how the vaccine was fast-tracked and just frightened about any long-term that may come up?
I am not concerned at all. This has been studied. I'm so very grateful that there were so many volunteers who are willing to participate in the study of this coming up to the release. But no, it's been studied. It's been cleared by the FDA. I've talked to my physician, several of our physicians at the facility here. I've studied on my own and feel that it's completely safe. So I have no concerns moving forward.
First priority was given to those in the healthcare field who are working directly with coronavirus patients.
Yeah.
So tell us about your experience with that. That's got to be very heavy.
It is. So, first of all, we deal with very sick patients on a regular basis prior to the pandemic. So we're used to seeing people when they're really in their toughest spot. But Corona has just been a whole nother level of suffering, of pain, and all these patients are coming in. They don't have any family with them. They don't have any loved ones by their bedside because of visitor restrictions. So that's been probably the hardest part, is that they've been suffering alone. We do our best to be at their bedside as much as we can and to comfort them and to reassure them. But it is a different time right now, and so that's been the hardest part. And on top of that, we've just seen so many incredibly sick people. So we're really looking forward to getting to a point where everyone can get vaccinated who wants to and move on past this pandemic.
It's almost as if you're not only an RN, but a hospice nurse as well. What do you say to people when you have to be there, when they're alone and hurting?
Yeah. So I just reassure them again and again that we're here for them. If they need anything, we leave their call light by their bedside. I'm not afraid to go in their room. If they're COVID positive or potentially have COVID, I put on the PPE gear and go in there because that's our priority. So I try to reassure them that we're there for them. That's our purpose, is to be there to make them comfortable in any way we can, and try to engage with them, try to understand their lives. Because they don't have family there, I try to understand a little bit more than I would previously, a little bit about who they are, so that they know that someone's there listening and concerned and wants to have their best
How will
interest.
the vaccine change things, particularly once you've gotten that second dose and are presumably don't have to personally fear getting COVID anymore?
Yeah. Well, it won't immediately change anything for me because I, still need to protect other people. I still need to be an example to everyone else wearing a mask. I don't want to be walking down the street and people say, oh, that looks like that nurse I saw at the hospital and he's not wearing a mask, so I don't need to wear one either. So it's not going to change anything for me until the numbers go down and public health officials are telling us that it's safe not to wear a mask, which is quite a ways away, unfortunately. But what it will change is that I'll feel comfortable that we're not going to have staff who are calling in sick, because we've had several staff members, especially this fall, who were sick, and some even very sick and hospitalized. So, you know, in order for us to continue to be able to be present for the patients, this is going to be great for our staff.
Because only if medical staff are healthy will they be able to work to try to get their patients to be so as well. Now, Hooks, who lives nearby, says perhaps the area nearby Loretto Hospital has suffered the most in the city of Chicago from COVID. But he says today was a great day for the hospital, for Austin, and for all of the city of Chicago. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. As shipments of the COVID vaccine make their way across the U.S., watchdogs and government officials have a warning for residents. Beware of possible coronavirus-related scams. WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson joins us now with what to be on the lookout for. Matt, what kind of scams have been reported thus far?
So as the vaccine has begun being rolled out, there's already been reports of people saying they've received calls offering them free or early doses of the Pfizer vaccine for $80. And that's, of course, a scam, according to the Better Business Bureau, as the vaccine is not offered for sale over the phone. That's one of the more brazen scamming attempts that's been reported, according to them. But there's also been other recent claims of scammers impersonating officials from the CDC, from the World Health Organization, and emails and robocalls that are seeking to gain sensitive and private information from victims.
Now, of course, there's an agency looking into these scams. Tell us about that agency and what they found so far.
So before the vaccine rollout began and throughout the course of this pandemic, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has been investigating all sorts of COVID-19 related scams. The department has already analyzed over 70,000 different websites that have been suspected of being involved in different COVID-related scams, with things relating to fake PPE products and pharmaceuticals that are being offered. According to the AP, the Homeland Security investigations have already made more than 1,600 product seizures, totaling more than $27 million, and have made more than 185 arrests in those cases.
Scammers are already at work, obviously. Matt Masterson, thank you so much.
Thanks.
And you can read Matt's full story on our website, where you'll find more details about how to report scams to the Better Business Bureau or Department of Homeland Security. It's all at WTTW.com/news. During the winter holidays, the demand on food pantries spikes. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated hunger around the U.S., with the organization Feeding America estimating an additional 50 million people may go without enough food this year. But the pandemic has also presented major logistical challenges for organizations trying to meet the needs of people facing food insecurity. Joining us to talk about that are Michelle Zurikowski, Executive Director of the Oak Park-based nonprofit Beyond Hunger, and Sherry Iverson, Senior Director of Volunteer and Marketing Engagement at the Greater Chicago Food Depository. Thanks to you both for joining us tonight. Sherry, let's start with you, please. What kind of demand do you see in an ordinary year, and what are you seeing this year?
There's always a demand for food, unfortunately, in the Cook County area, and we typically see an increase during the holidays. However, we've never seen an increase such as this. As you had stated earlier with the Feeding America numbers, we're seeing about almost 800,000 people that are food insecure at this moment in the areas that we serve. So we're doing our best to try to reach every individual and do our best to support them as much as we can.
And that 800,000, that's the highest demand in your 41-year history.
Yeah, it's about a 50% increase since prior to the pandemic.
Michelle Zurikowski, same question to you. How would you say the demand that you're getting this year compares to previous years, ordinary years?
Yeah, it's changed a lot over the course of the pandemic. I think the first in April are the incidents of new people who had never been to pantries increased by 250%. So that was a really shocking number, but it was really, there's a disproportional effect for Black communities and particularly Latino immigrant communities. So those populations have a different kind of we've seen different numbers from them than we have from white individuals.
And Michelle, I want to come back to that in a little bit as well. But Sherry, how much of your work relies on volunteers, and what kind of challenges are you experiencing with keeping them safe, but also having enough volunteers?
Sure. So we typically have about 18,000 volunteers come annually. And obviously with the pandemic and the scare and the fear that people have, we're seeing those numbers drop drastically. So we definitely need those volunteers to come out. And how we're doing, how we're making it safe, we've put a lot of precautions in place. We're following all the CDC guidelines. We ask that everyone affirms that they don't have any symptoms, they haven't been around anyone who may have contracted the virus. We also have social distancing throughout the food depository, as well as utilizing our warehouse. We have an extremely large warehouse, and we've utilized a lot of that space to put our project areas there so that everyone is socially distanced. Everyone obviously needs to wear a mask, and we provide a lot of PPE for everyone. So the personal protective equipment is definitely something that we rely on heavily.
And Michelle, you just mentioned it, but you know, the pandemic has hit Black and brown communities in a variety of ways. But what are you seeing with regard to food insecurity with the people that you serve?
Yeah, it's different for Black and Latino communities. So for that, we serve Austin. So shout out to Loretta Hospital, great partners with us. So yeah, what we saw in Austin was particularly elderly Black individuals stopped coming. Because they were fearful, right, of taking the bus, or, you know, people that normally would carpool with, they couldn't carpool with anymore, right, because of social distancing. So the need for our home delivery program tripled with that population. Whereas the Latino immigrant population that we serve, that need really spiked because a lot of the benefits that came from the stimulus package didn't apply to those folks. And so we saw a huge spike from that population.
And to that end, Michelle, you all also, you changed your model where people can come in and shop for food, and you moved away from that to drive through and walk up. But what kind of challenges has that presented?
Well, we had to change every aspect of the operations, right? And so this, if you remember Saturday, it rained and was awful. So if you can imagine the volunteers sort of schlepping all the boxes out there to try to put them in the trunks of cars, there was a lot of soggy volunteers. But they were happy because they were happy to see how thrilled people were. And we were able to give everybody a turkey for the whole month of November. So that was really exciting for lots of people. But yeah, but actually people who came through the pantry really like that drive-through option. It's fast, it's easy, and it cuts down on stigma. People aren't seeing you, your neighbors aren't seeing you in the same kinds of ways. So that was helpful for people.
And Sherry, we've got about 45 seconds left. You know, what kind of demand does your organization expect in the coming months until a lot more people can get vaccinated?
We definitely think that's going to get a little worse before it gets better. You know, we're doing 50% more than we were in the past. I think with we've got some great news this evening about people getting the vaccination, and I think hopefully more people will feel better, feel safe. And I would say in the next few months, we definitely will see this need. If not stay the same, it will increase, but know that the Greater Chicago Food Depository will be here to serve and work with our community the best that we can.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Sherry Iverson and Michelle Zurikowski. Best of luck to you both.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays.
Same to you. And you can find information on both of those organizations on our website. And now to Paris, and a look into a recent massive cybersecurity breach by the Russians. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. Russian state intelligence services have hacked multiple U.S. agencies in a massive cybersecurity espionage attack, according to U.S. government officials. So far, the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, the National Institutes of Health, and the Treasury and Commerce Departments were targeted, with more federal agencies and thousands of private companies expected to follow. Here to talk about these attacks are Maurice Dawson, the director of the Center for Cybersecurity and Forensics Education at the Illinois Institute of Technology, where he's also an assistant professor of cybersecurity, and Justin Sherman, a fellow at the Atlantic Council's Cyber Statecraft Initiative. He's also a contributor at Wired magazine. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us here on Chicago Tonight. First to you, Justin Sherman, explain to us exactly how this hack worked.
So this hack was perpetrated through what we call a supply chain attack. So rather than hacking directly into the systems of all of these different government agencies and companies, the SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, instead targeted technology supplied to all of those different groups by a third-party vendor. So in this case, this was a company called SolarWinds, based out of Texas, and it supplied this network management software that DHS, the Commerce Department, all of these different organizations were using on their systems. And so what the Russians did was they targeted the software update mechanisms for this technology. They embedded malware in one of the updates to this SolarWinds software. And so when the Department of Homeland Security, Commerce, these others went to update this tool months ago, they did not just receive, standard security updates or perhaps some new features, but instead we're actually moving this SVR malware onto their computer systems.
So they're getting this malware through the third-party SolarWinds. Maurice Dawson, how deep does this breach penetrate?
Well, so this breach penetrates a number of organizations that are using this particular software. So when you can find a software that's common across organizations, you can use that as a backdoor into other organizations. So like what Justin said, the supply chain, a lot of times when we look at cybersecurity, we look at the end product, and there aren't many organizations that look at every particular, subcontractor supplying a particular product. So say if it's an office suite, one organization may not build that suite. They may have someone who's doing something with fonts or something in terms of the way that a Word document gets exported to PDF. So all these different organizations, they are doing items within code development, and they need to have controls in place. And so if one of these particular organizations are infiltrated and there's malware embedded in the code, it ends up getting wrapped into the overall product and it's hidden in there. And then later, a particular threat, you could say a bad actor can take advantage of that.
So it seems like there's all kinds of possible breaches with these third-party software companies. Justin Sherman, we mentioned the different federal agencies that were hacked. Once these systems download the malware, what sort of information is vulnerable, and what do you believe Russian state actors were after?
Well, so it's important not to speculate too much here. And I say that because details are still coming out, and in the coming weeks and months, we'll get more information, I'm sure, about not just other companies and agencies that were affected, as you referenced, but the exact nature of perhaps what was taken or what was targeted. That said, because these the network management tools built by SolarWinds does seem pretty central to the management of these networks. It not only was responsible for monitoring critical activity on networks, but also responsible in some cases for failure and disaster recovery functions. It would seem to follow that infiltrating those systems, embedding malware through that vector would provide access to all kinds of sensitive information from these different agencies. And there's been, some initial reporting and suggestion that emails were targeted, for example. But you can imagine that if you are the SVR, if you're the Russian Foreign Intelligence Agency, particularly during an election season, a very contentious and important election season in the US, there's really a lot of important intelligence and national security information to be gathered from breaking into all of these different systems.
It's amazing still that the election, according to former CISA Director Chris Krebs, was so secure now that we see the details of this breach. Maurice Dawson, one cybersecurity expert, saying this is an 11 on the scale of 1 to 10 in terms of seriousness. What do you make of that?
Well, you got to think about all the past events that led up to this. So if you look at past events such as the cyber attack in Estonia, you look at the Ukrainian power grid, these are all foreshadowing events of what has to come. And so what we know now is that lots of information was taken, emails and stuff like that. What generally happens is you have networks segregated. So it may not have been classified information, but it may have been information to give enough details about all the particular individuals within those federal agencies. How they communicate, what they communicate about, various intellectual property and stuff like that. And so these are things that, potentially could have been, let go, or provided, or that's now known to whatever particular country is responsible. The other thing to think about is that once they've actually breached these particular networks, Did they create other backdoors? Did they create other accounts that are sitting there? Because it will take a while for any agency to figure out, like, well, let's do a check on all the particular accounts here. Because they could have other accounts set up, and that's something that we won't know, and we don't know. What was the actual damage done? What were the other things?
A lot to discover here. I want to read a quote from Illinois Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger. He says, quote, "I was shocked and dismayed that initial reports already seem to indicate this Russian offensive operation may be one of the most damaging in the history of our republic. We must conduct a nationwide assessment of the public and private sector systems which were compromised, as we cannot repair our networks and our national security posture without one. Finally, we must resolve to exact justice and retribution upon the Russians for these crimes, as well as any others engaging in these attacks against the United States." Justin Sherman, this is kind of a policy question here, but what would be an appropriate retaliation against the Russians should an investigation confirm all this?
It's a good question. The answer is complex, and there's a lot embedded there, even in that statement. I think the first thing we have to ask is what we're trying to do or defend against. So if we're talking about preventing the actual attack occurring on a technical level, if we're talking, as Maurice said, about very complex environments where there's lots of technology from different suppliers, you might be running HP computers that use Microsoft Windows linked to a Cisco router with 30 other things installed, right? How do you ensure the integrity of that supply chain, the security of that supply chain? That's a very different question from what should be done or could be done to shape Russian behavior about this.
We have to leave it there. Our thanks again to Maurice Dawson and Justin Sherman. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Up next, meet a man who's been making art with a chainsaw for 40 years. He is a crafty artist who uses a gas-powered paintbrush and tree trunks as his canvas. We caught up with a Chicago area entrepreneur who has been using chainsaws to make wood sculptures for nearly 40 years. Producer Mark Vitale met him to find out how he carves his living out of dead trees.
He can turn an old tree stump into a bird of prey or a wildcat.
My name is Eric Wittitz, and I am a chainsaw sculptor. Pretty much a sharp chainsaw will cut any kind of wood, so every wood has its own beauty, its own advantages. Some hold better details, some require more sanding and so forth. I mean, the goal is to remove wood to create whatever subject I'm going after, and chainsaw is just a great tool to remove wood quickly. And with a steady hand, it can actually do quite a bit of detail with it as well. I'm always making adjustments. It's easy to make an overcut. And so that's actually what's so hard about it, is to hold the chainsaw real steady and to not take off too much.
Since the early 1980s, Eric Wittitz has carved up a forest full of wooden wildlife and all sorts of things.
I've done thousands of sculptures, so I've done so many different subjects over the years. Lots of totem poles and done a few Bigfoot. Primarily it seems to be like owls and squirrels, raccoons.
Some works display a rustic artistry. Others are more fun than a bear's winning streak. Family pets are a popular subject, or a customer might want a character from the Star Wars universe. Most are made in front yards and backyards.
Primarily it seems to be standing trees in people's yards, that got broken off by a windstorm or disease. Typically, I ask for people to send me a picture of their tree and give me a trunk measurement, and then I can superimpose a sketch over the top of it, digitally. Proportion-wise, I'll make whatever theme that the people are interested in. I can put that into the log.
We visited Eric Wittitz at the Red Tail Golf Course in Fox River Grove. It was the last day of his outdoor season, and the chainsaws didn't seem to bother the golfers too much.
It's probably 90-95% chainsaw, most of my work, and then I do, I refine it with whatever the customer wants.
His creations can take as little as an hour to make, or as long as weeks. They typically survive the elements for a dozen years, sometimes much longer. Prices range from a few $100s into the thousands, and they usually come with finishing touches.
Most of the time I do a little burning, and that burns off some of the fuzzy stuff, brings out the wood grain, highlights the texture, dries the wood a little bit. And then on the outdoor sculptures, I put a siding and deck preservative. I studied horticulture in college, and I didn't actually finish because I really didn't need to. I was managing a tree nursery in Lake Zurich, and I was actually training people that were college graduates. So College of Hard Knocks taught me. Never really had a problem staying busy. So there's seems to always be a demand for good quality sculptures, and trees keep dying.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
That is spectacular, and as you could tell, our visit took place on one of the last few warm days of the season. During winter months, Eric Wittitz focuses on indoor sculpture and woodwork. Find out more about him and his company, Art in Trees, on our website. And that is our show for this Tuesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. CPS parents on whether they'll be sending their kids back to schools if they reopen in January.
And a Chicago artist uses his nonprofit to honor those who have died at the hands of gun violence. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible in part by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season.